Aliens sent a fake SOS to lure prey. They didn't expect Deathworlders to answer. The void cracked open as two heavy tungsten blocks flew from the rails. They did not slow down. The lead interceptor did not shatter under the strike. It turned to superheated vapor within less than a second as the kinetic shockwave passed straight through its black metal frame. No warning, no declaration, no escape. Commander Gideon Sterling stood completely still against the glowing tactical screen. The red markers representing the ambush fleet were disappearing one by one, leaving nothing behind but drifting slag. He did not smile, and he did not raise his voice. He reached down, checked the mechanical pressure valve on his left wrist, and adjusted his grip on the console. Would you have dropped into that quiet space, or would you have left the signal alone? Because they did not leave it alone. Stay close. 18 cycles before the metal melted, Fleet Exarch Malachar stepped onto the high platform at Cradle Point to demand his new harvesting rights. His 6 long limbs moved with absolute precision as he adjusted his heavy lead sash. He looked across the thousands of delegates sitting under the cold crystal dome. The air in the grand hall smelled of old iron and sharp ozone, the same mixture that had filled the chamber for 9,000 years. He flipped a switch on his talking device, causing a sharp click to ripple through the lower tiers. The unrated sectors along the outer boundary were full of weak, unprotected life, and his raiding fleet had spent cycles setting the perfect automated trap. They would broadcast a false civilian distress loop, pull the small scavenger ships out of warp, and take the crews for processing. It was an efficient economic template. Elder Saluma leaned forward from the Valeth rows, her thin fingers tapping against her data slate. She had gray skin that looked like worn paper under the bright lights. She told the assembly that the targeted sector sat directly along the edge of a newly found world. The people there were different. They had traveled between the stars for only 300 years, and they were still considered unrated by the Council records. Malachar let out a low vibration from his chest plates, his compound eyes fixed on the Elder as he dismissed her warning. The human outposts were small, their radio signals were primitive, and they had no capital warships registered in the main library. Their response to a civilian cry for help would be weak, slow, and easily managed by his interceptors. The delegates agreed. The harvesting order passed by a wide vote, and Malachar sent his ships into the dark. The heavy cruiser Aegis Sentinel moved silently along the unmapped frontier line. Inside the dark bridge, the deck plates vibrated to a low, steady sound. It was the 2-cycle stroke of the main pneumatic cylinders holding the pressure lines level, thump, 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 thump. The sound never stopped. Lieutenant Chen turned from her console and looked at the commander. Her fingers stayed near the primary command dials. She reported a civilian beacon repeating every 14 seconds just outside the colonial sector boundary. It had no standard Empire tags, and the signal came from a dark patch of space near the local ice rings. Sterling walked over to the main map, his boots making a dull click against the metal floor. The left side of his face was flat, his ear missing its lobe from a shrapnel breach during his younger cycles in the deep trenches. He looked at the uniform blue line of the frequency graph. He took a slow breath, noticing the mineral bite of the ion-filtered air. The frequency was too clean. A real civilian ship with a failing reactor would have a decaying pulse, a stutter in the transmission, an imperfect rhythm. This loop was exactly uniform, down to the millisecond. He did not order a high-speed rescue sprint. He reached down and pressed the amber override button on his panel, locking the ship's internal networks into a hardwired circuit. He told Chen to activate the Lazarus protocol and wake the defensive stations in the surrounding ice bands. They were going in with active weapon locks. Down in the dark hangar bay, the air was cold and smelled of heavy grease. Sergeant Torres sat on the edge of a thick steel drop pod, his boots dangling over the open launch well. He held a battered brass lighter, flicking the cap open and closed with a regular metallic snap. Around him, 100 Marines in thick power armor checked their visor seals. They did not talk. They had trained for this exact deployment pattern for 30 years, building hidden installations behind the frozen rock where the Council inspectors never thought to look. Torres touched the rough metal of his lighter, waiting for the red launch light to shift. The obsidian talon sat completely dark inside the shadow of a frozen moon. Malachar watched his tactical displays from his command chair, his 6 arms resting on the control arms. The human heavy cruiser had dropped out of warp exactly where his false beacon had been broadcasting. It was a blocky, unpainted box of matte black titanium. It had no glowing energy shields, no decorative hull plates, and no high-frequency scanning arrays. To his Empire databases, it looked exactly like an oversized cargo transport. He believed the humans were simple fools who had brought a freight ship to save a dying crew. He ordered his 12 interceptors to drop their cloaking fields and form a wide execution arc around the black vessel. He turned on the open channel and sent his standard compliance terms into the human cockpit. He told them they had entered a restricted harvesting zone and they must turn off their main drives or face immediate classification as low-priority targets. On the human bridge, Chen did not look up as the alien voice clicked through the speakers. She bypassed the static, switching the main thruster lines to manual control. The ship did not slow down, and it did not reply to the message. Sterling watched the 12 red markers closing the distance. He reached down, touched the mechanical valve on his wrist, and verified the pressure line. He told the crew that a distress frequency was not an invitation to bargain. It was a localized anchor point. Malaker's compound eyes shifted as his rear sensor panels began to flash. The automated database could not identify the 40 white thermal signatures that had just broken through the ice rings behind his fleet. They were not ships. They were prepositioned kinetic missile pods, hidden in the rock for decades, now linked directly to the Aegis Sentinel's central firing line. The trap had closed from behind. The human vanguard had not come to look for a broken transport. They had brought an entire mobile staging grid into the dark, and they were already tracking his engines. The Raider interceptors tried to raise their high-density plasma shields, but the human destroyers advanced like moving walls, completely ignoring the electronic jamming. The matte black ships stayed in their tight diamond formation. At the 9-minute mark of the engagement, the primary rails on the Aegis Sentinel discharged. 2 heavy tungsten slugs tore through the lead Raider ship, punching clean holes through the bow and stern before the internal pressure turned the hull into a cloud of glowing particles. The precision energy fields of the hegemony meant nothing against raw kinetic mass moving at a fraction of light speed. Malaker watched his screens die in sequence. His 12 interceptors were caught in a tight boxing maneuver against the heavy gravity well of the local gas giant. His 6 limbs struck the control panels, trying to input a withdrawal vector, but the automated command loops were already locked by the human network. The screens turned white, then gray, then dark. He turned his talking device to full power, shouting a desperate request for a ceasefire across the open frequency. Sterling reached out and gripped the main communication lever. He looked at the last red marker fading from the tactical map. He told the Exarch that they did not ignore a cry for help, even a fake one. Then he pulled the handle back and cut the line. 2 months later, the Grand Assembly Hall at Cradle Point was completely cold. The delegates sat in their curved rows, their voices quiet as Elder Saluma walked toward the center of the floor. She did not bring an administrative report or a legal appeal. She held a single, hardwired data node and slipped it into the central presentation desk. The main projector turned on, throwing a grainy, unedited playback across the marble walls. There was no music on the track, and there were no speeches from the human government. The footage showed the twisted, scarred hull of the Obsidian Talon being dragged through the upper orbital foundries by 2 small human tugboats. From the speaker arrays at the base of the desk, a low, steady sound began to vibrate through the floorboards of the council hall. It was a rhythmic, 2-cycle mechanical strike, thump thump, thump thump. The line did not break. The pressure simply found its true vector. Saluma took her node back from the desk and turned to look at the silent delegates. The void remembers every voice, even the liars.